I'm sure all of you are aware by now that Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, has been kicked out of the Ecuadorian embassy in London and has been arrested for publishing the Afghanistan and Iraq War Logs given to him by Chelsea Manning. What I'm about to say is not an exaggeration. This is one of the most brazen attacks on the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press that I've seen in my 22 years of being alive on this planet. Before I get into the implications of this arrest and the precedent that it sets, let me just make sure that we're all on the same page about the facts that have already been established. So a few days ago now, WikiLeaks came out with a major announcement that they had high-level sources within the Ecuadorian government who confirmed that they will be revoking Julian Assange's asylum and had an agreement with the UK government for his arrest. The Ecuadorian government came out and strongly denied that they had come to any such decision and that they had an agreement with the UK government. But they strangely were still trying to convince everyone that even though they didn't make a decision about Assange, all of the accusations about Julian Assange violating the terms of his asylum were true. They claim that Julian Assange leaked personal information about the Ecuadorian president and his family, including private photos of them. That claim was just incredibly hard to believe. One, because WikiLeaks is not a hacking organization and they don't steal anybody's information. Two, WikiLeaks isn't some fucking tabloid rag that releases personal information about people like some celebrity gossip bullshit. And thirdly, Julian Assange has been cut off from the outside world. He has no contact with anyone other than his lawyers, and he has no access to the internet. But it turns out that this was just a bullshit pretext that the Ecuadorian government had concocted to cover their asses for revoking Julian Assange's asylum, which is illegal under international law and Ecuadorian law. So that's how they got Julian Assange out of the embassy. Now, the reason why he's been taken into custody, according to the UK government, is in part having to do with the charge that Assange jumped bail years ago to avoid charges that have since been dropped because, as the years have gone by, that case against Julian Assange was also bullshit. So at the time, it was perfectly logical and probably even the right decision to jump bail because every major world power was out for Julian Assange's head, and there was overwhelming evidence that he would have likely been tortured, if not assassinated. So for his own protection, he jumped bail and sought out asylum at the Ecuadorian embassy so that he wouldn't be extradited and tortured and possibly even murdered. But the main reason the UK government gives for taking Assange into custody is in compliance with an extradition request by the United States government based on an arrest warrant and an indictment for allegedly conspiring with Chelsea Manning to steal classified government documents. So now let me break down how the claim that Julian Assange is some type of co-conspirator with Chelsea Manning is bullshit. First of all, WikiLeaks does not hack. They do not steal government documents. What they do is the same as every other news outlet in the world. They have whistleblowers, they have government sources who have access to this information, bring it to them, and they publish it, which is something that is protected under the First Amendment of the US Constitution, and it's also protected by many other international laws and agreements to protect freedom of speech and the freedom of the press. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks know how important it is that they maintain their standing as journalists and not hackers who are trying to steal information. Because as journalists, they're protected from prosecution for publishing stories that are true and expose government secrets. If they were to cross the line and become hackers and go out of their way to steal classified information, then all the protection that they have from prosecution is gone, and the entire organization and all the work that they do would be in jeopardy. Another point, Barack Obama's Justice Department and the Pentagon also try to make a case against Assange for the same exact thing. They wanted to link Assange to the act of stealing the documents because then he would not be protected from prosecution as a journalist. They looked through every document, every correspondence, every chat, every communication between Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange to make that case. And trust me, The Obama administration had no intention of going easy on Julian Assange because the information that he published was so damning and embarrassing because it exposed brazen war crimes by the US military, as well as cover-ups going up to the highest level of government. And the ramifications of those things being made public were very wide-reaching. But even though they wanted Julian Assange's head and they wanted to nail his ass to the wall for this, they came to the conclusion that after looking at all the evidence, there's no way that they could distinguish what Julian Assange and WikiLeaks did with his correspondence to Chelsea Manning from what the New York Times and the Washington Post and CNN and all these other major news outlets do on a regular basis when they publish classified documents. Now in comes the Trump Justice Department, and they've come to the exact opposite conclusion of the Obama administration. And how did they come to this conclusion? It's not like any new evidence has magically appeared that directly implicates Julian Assange in any criminal action. Instead, they are deliberately misinterpreting 2 emails from Assange and turning it into evidence of some type of grand conspiracy between Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. In one of the emails, Chelsea Manning has just sent over, I believe it was the documents about the Guantanamo Bay to Julian Assange. And she was telling him, after this, I think that's all I've got for you. And Assange responds by saying something like, curious eyes never go dry in my experience, which is basically him just saying, I'm sure at some point you will come across more evidence of war crimes. And when you do, I want you to share it with me. All that is Julian Assange pressing his source for information, which is something that every single journalist does whenever they're talking to a source, whether it's about classified information or not. The other email, Chelsea Manning had contacted Julian Assange to let him know that she couldn't get access to certain files because she didn't have a specific password, so she asked if Julian Assange can help her out. In order to protect his source, like every other journalist does, he tried to help her with the password so that she wouldn't get caught trying to access the server, because if she did get caught, her cover would be blown and she would likely be sent to prison. But Julian Assange wasn't even able to help her out with that. But what's a very important piece of information that almost nobody is discussing is how could that be proof that they were conspiring the whole time to illegally steal classified information if before both of those emails, Chelsea Manning had already given Julian Assange hundreds of thousands of classified documents that she already stole by herself. So this indictment and their evidence doesn't even stand up to the most basic scrutiny. But those 2 flimsy, weak pieces of evidence is what the Department of Justice is trying to use as some sort of smoking gun to carry out unprecedented moves against a foreign journalist, including illegally arresting him inside of an embassy and extraditing him to the United States so he could be prosecuted. Now, what are the implications and the precedent that are being set by this course of action? This may sound dramatic and hyperbolic, but now no journalist anywhere in the world is safe. Because now the precedent is, if you publish true information that is being hidden by any government and is in the public's best interest to know, you can be arrested and extradited to that country to face prosecution no matter where you are in the world. So if you get access to classified government documents that expose corruption or war crimes from any of the major world powers, whether it's China or Russia or Turkey or the UK or the US or Saudi Arabia or Australia or France, and it's embarrassing and damaging enough, they will pull all kinds of strings in order to get you arrested and brought back to their country to face prosecution. And mind you, they arrested Julian Assange in an embassy where he had been granted asylum, which is again unprecedented. So it's not an exaggeration to say you're not safe anywhere in the world if Julian Assange wasn't safe and in a protected embassy where he had been granted asylum. And this does not only apply to foreign reporters, this applies to journalists right here in the United States too. What if someone from the New York Times or CNN or the Washington Post or the Intercept or the Guardian, wherever, what if they were handed classified information about the Saudis' genocide in Yemen, or any of their other nefarious activities, and they publish it. Now the precedent that has been set is that if you are that journalist and say you're in the UK or you're in Turkey or the UAE or anywhere, the Saudi government can pull strings with the government of whichever country you're in and have you arrested and extradited back to Saudi Arabia to face prosecution and possibly even death. So the arrest of Julian Assange alone is terrible and a scandal, because what he did was publish the truth about US war crimes and our torture and how we were slaughtering civilians and then covering it up. But the precedent is also so profound and wide-reaching that it's its own giant scandal and story of the century. I'll be doing another video about this next week where I go into detail about some of the biggest stories and contribution to journalism that WikiLeaks has done since it's been founded. But for right now, this is bad news, and it's a dark day for journalism and democracy around the world. Because without a free press that can publish truthful, accurate stories about government corruption and cover-ups, the public will never know about this. Because the government has no intention, and they will never willingly hand over this information to the public, who they are supposed to be working on behalf of. We are already in a place where corporate media has destroyed the field of journalism. And also in recent years, journalists have been under attack by all different governments around the world, including right here in the United States under the Barack Obama administration. So with this move, we're going even further in the wrong direction. If independent journalists will be prosecuted for telling the truth, we're in serious trouble, and this is looking more and more like a dystopian future every single day.